In complex systems, problems have a strange way of reappearing, often long after they are thought to be solved. This reoccurrence is rarely a new failure. Instead, it's often a direct consequence of the system's underlying structure. This analysis will examine the mechanism by which systems displace problems rather than resolve them, a process of passing costs downstream.
So, why do solved problems reappear? The common assumption, of course, is that once a problem is fixed, it stays fixed. When it comes back, we tend to see it as a failure of the original solution or maybe just a brand new problem altogether. But this view misses a critical dynamic. It assumes the system's goal is to eliminate problems. What if instead it's designed merely to relocate their costs?
The fundamental idea here is simple. Some problems aren't actually solved at all. The underlying cost, the thing that makes it a problem in the first place, hasn't gone away.
It has just been moved, it's been transferred somewhere else in the system, or pushed off into the future, or sometimes it's disguised by simply lowering the standard of what we even call a problem.
To really understand how this works, we have to start small, at the level of a single actor within the system. Every actor makes choices based on the information and incentives they have right in front of them. And what drives those decisions? Well, it's the costs they can see.
This is what we call the private cost. It's the costs an actor pays directly. It's visible, it's immediate, it's the resources they personally have to spend to take an action.
But that's not the whole story. There's another kind of cost, the social cost. This is the total cost of that same action. It includes the private costs that the actor paid, but it also includes all the indirect costs that spill over onto everyone else in the system.
And here's the crucial part. The social cost is almost always bigger than the private cost. This creates a gap between the cost one person pays and the total cost everyone else ends up bearing. And that uncounted cost, it has to go somewhere.
So where does it go? The cost doesn't just disappear. It gets shifted away from the person who made the decision and is imposed on someone else. This is the absolute core of how problems get displaced.
There's a formal term for this in economics, a negative externality. It's simply an uncompensated cost that's pushed onto an uninvolved party. That externality is the gap, the difference between the private cost and the true social cost of an action. Now, from the actor's point of view, their choice makes perfect sense. It's completely rational. They get a direct benefit, but they only have to pay their private cost. The rest of it, the external cost, just flows away. It goes downstream, where it will eventually be absorbed by other people, by some shared resource, or maybe just by the future.
One person shifting one cost, well, that's often not a big deal. It's insignificant. The problem starts when this becomes the default behavior for lots of actors in the system. That's when all those small external costs start to add up and they show up as huge systemic problems. We can actually see this accumulation happen in a few distinct patterns.
Okay, let's look at the first pattern. This is what happens when those external costs are all dumped onto a shared finite resource. This is a classic system archetype. You may have heard of it. It's called the tragedy of the commons. Imagine a resource that's open to everyone. For any single person, the most rational thing to do is to use as much of that resource as possible. Why? Because the benefit is all theirs, but the cost of using it up, the depletion, is shared by everybody.
So every single actor pushes the cost of their own consumption onto that common pool. And since everyone is making the same, locally rational decision, the combined effect is the slow degradation and eventual collapse of the very resource the whole system needs to survive. The problem wasn't solved. Its costs were just absorbed by the commons, right up until the point that the commons failed.
Now for our second pattern. This one happens when costs aren't shifted to another place, but to another time. They get pushed off into the future.
This archetype is known as shifting the burden. Here's the setup. A system has a problem, and there are two ways to deal with it. There's an easy, quick fix that only treats the symptom, and then there's a harder, more fundamental solution. That quick fix gives immediate relief, which makes it seem like the most rational choice in the short term.
But by applying that easy fix over and over again, the system gets to avoid the much larger investment needed to solve the real problem. The cost of that underlying issue is just externalized to the future. And of course, over time, the real problem doesn't just sit there. It gets worse. The system can even become addicted to the quick fix, which makes tackling the fundamental problem even more expensive and even more difficult down the line.
The third pattern is a bit more subtle. It involves shifting costs by changing the very definition of what's considered acceptable.
In the growth and underinvestment archetype, a system is under strain from growing demand. It just can't keep up. Now, one option is to invest in more capacity, but that takes time. So, under all that pressure, another option starts to look very appealing. Instead of improving performance to meet the standard, you just lower the standard to meet the current performance.
Think about that. Instead of paying the cost of investing to meet the goal, the system pays the cost by simply lowering the goal. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is closed, not by getting better, but by wanting less. The problem of underperformance is, in effect, solved by just redefining it until it disappears.
So when we see these patterns, a depleting resource, a delayed solution, an eroding standard, it's tempting to see them as separate, isolated failures. But they're not. They are all the emergent results of the same single underlying logic.
And that logic begins with rational local choices. At every single step, the actions make sense from the actor's perspective. It's logical to use a free resource, to apply a quick fix, to adjust a goal to match reality. These are all locally optimal decisions.
The profound paradox is that when you add all of these rational local choices together, they create a deeply irrational global outcome. A resource that's been destroyed, a problem that's now impossible to solve, or a system that has quietly accepted failure as its new definition of success.
This reveals the system's hidden logic. When problems keep reappearing, it's not necessarily a sign of incompetence or bad actors. It's often a sign that the system is just following its own rules perfectly. In this logic, problems and their costs aren't meant to be eliminated. They're meant to be displaced. They flow, almost like water, to the parts of the system that can't push back, to a shared resource, to the future, to the standard itself. They flow to wherever the costs are not counted,